All right, it is 4:30-ish. Call the meeting to order. Acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, EES Tla-o-qui-aht. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. A notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment in question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, participants are required to enter their full name, residential address, and the agenda item they wish to speak to. Through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I'll move that pursuant to section 15 of the District of Tofino meeting procedure bylaw number 1229/2016 is amended. The July 25th, 2023 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. That the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall 380 Campbell Street in Tofino, BC. Seeing no objection, the motion is carried. I have an amendment to the agenda. I move through unanimous consent that the agenda be amended to move item 10.5 to after item 10.1. Just a moment. Probably should be 10.5 immediately after item 10.1. Seeing no objection, that amendment is there, and then I'll move that the July 25th, 2023 regular council agenda as amended be adopted. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. The consent agenda. Through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I'll move that item 4.1 of the consent agenda on the regular council meeting held July 25th, 2023 be approved and received. No comment, that is carried. Mr. Shortall, do we have any public comment on agenda items?
Thanks, Mayor Law. Currently, there's no comments on any of the agenda items, but I will do a call to the public. So anybody in the council chambers or online via Zoom, you can use the Q&A function to make a comment to the council. If doing so, you need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you're making a comment on. So I'll call 3 times now, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times, and no questions or comments at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Shortall. Move on to the mayor's report. Hard to believe with the rain today, but it is true that the province is experiencing a severe drought, almost province-wide, and a fire season that is larger than any in 100 years. And to that end, myself and staff have been meeting almost weekly with Minister Ma, Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Minister Kang, our Minister of Municipal Affairs, and others for updates on both the drought conditions and the fire status across the province. I've also been in weekly updates with our MLA Osborne, both on drought and also on the status of Highway 4, which of course has been impacted by fires and ongoing work-related closures. Those have been excellent to attend, I say. Recent water town hall, a total of 324 people attended the Water Conservation Community Town Hall, whether personally or virtually. It's an exceptional number for a small town. And I do want to thank all of the residents and businesses and visitors who have taken up the challenge to try to bring water use down. It has been working. And we look forward to keeping it working despite the rain. We will continue to see a drought the rest of the summer, it looks like, across the province. So this remains very serious. Tofino Housing Corporation and Catalyst Community Developments are now taking applications for the rental homes being constructed at Tonquin, Headwaters North and South. The application deadline is 9 p.m. on July 13th, 2023. And application forms can be found on the Tofino Housing Corporation website or via the front desk at the municipal office. So I encourage everybody that wants to access affordable housing in Tofino to certainly look at those, consider applying. And THC and Catalyst Community Developments are hosting 3 information sessions for the public. Thursday, July 27th, 4 to 6 p.m. Council Chambers. Friday, July 28th, 8 to 10 a.m. at the Council Chambers. And Saturday, July 29th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Tofino Market. That is all for my mayor's report. We have delegation from BC Hydro. Welcome.
Thank you. You've been mayor. Mayor Council, for allowing me to be here.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Always great to come out here. So I just provided an update. I'd just like to provide an update on the status of the project and maybe some background of how we supply for YouTube. So for residents to understand how supply is brought to the West Coast and what we do to try and keep the lights on as often as we can. Obviously not as often as residents would like, but we work hard to try and keep it on as much as we can. So, in the right direction. So just to provide an overview of our system, kind of almost the size of Washington State, Oregon, and California combined, believe it or not. And most of our power, it comes down from the Peace River area, Revelstoke and the Columbia area. It comes down to the lower mainland, south coast. It gets distributed, of course, to the interior as well, and then comes over to Vancouver Island. Where am I pointing to?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not working with the PDF, so I will just check here.
So I just thought I was making. I thought I was magic for a minute there.
Just be kind to
Power there, do whatever I want. I still need it though to hold on to. Come over to Vancouver Island. We generate about 40% of our own power on Vancouver Island. The rest comes from the mainland in approximate terms. We have 2 transmission cables that feed us. One from Tawasin over to Duncan. If you see the big substation that's in Duncan, that's VIT. That brings power over there. That's called our 230 kV system. That replaced some very aging cables. About 20 years ago, we were going through a debate what to do to bring more capacity, firm capacity, which is power you can count on when you need it. And we decided the best way to go was to bring more power over via cables. The other power comes across Texada Island to Qualicum Bay, which is just north of Qualicum Beach, Nile Creek, the big stuff up there. That's 500 kV lines. That's the big bulk of our system that provides us real off-island power. And that was the system that were landed, not in the water, just above the water line, tide line, that we had some problems with during the heat dome. And there was some damage of like everything else in the province. Unprecedented temperatures that impacted that, and we did some mitigation measures and then checked other arrival points of our transmission system on Vancouver Island to make sure we wouldn't encounter that again. And then to the and then to the West Coast, where it lands there, you see on the Nile Creek there, Qualicum Beach. Then it goes by transmission line up to Port Alberni. And then from Port Alberni to another substation, and then to the Long Beach substation, which is just east of along the highway there at the information center. That's the substation there. We do have one generating station, Ash River generating station, that feeds Great Central Lake, and that is good for the area in that if there's problems on the line to the east of Ash, we can island the area as we have done when you've had island time over here, when the clocks run at a slower rate than normal. So we're able to island the community. Unfortunately, when there's a problem to the west of the generating station, it's like the highway. When that's blocked, when there's a problem there, then we don't have the ability to feed the community any place else in the transmission system. It's very similar to what happens in the North Coast and to a very close, similar extent in Lake Cowichan as well. They're fed the end of a radial line. So we're just feeding off from the East Coast to the various other West Coast points on the island. And so you were experiencing growth over here. We know things slowed down, of course, across the island everywhere during COVID during the summertime, but we're a winter peaking facility. And you've experienced about 15% of growth since 2000. 20. 3 megawatts it does make a bit of difference, quite a bit of difference for us. So we have to make sure we meet the new supply, the new demands put on the system, of course, with residential housing development and the wastewater treatment facility, making sure we can power those demands, and anything else that comes online, whether it's further fish farm, any residential development, any fast charging station, anything else, we'll have to make sure we have enough power that we can meet the growth that the community expects and wants power in the area. We have had outages, of course. You've had outages. As I mentioned, the transmission system, when we do have a problem on that creates a lot of grief because it's challenging to make the repairs. Of course, it's never going to happen when it's weather like this. If we did, we could fly it, have somebody up there and fly it in no time. The trouble is when it's during a storm event. Of course, it's because it's a storm event, we can't get a helicopter up there right away to patrol the line to find out where the problem is and make repairs as required. But we do quite a lot of work on the transmission system. And I'll get to that. Some of the work we have made, the improvements we've made. Of course, we have distribution outages into the feeders that come out to the Tofino area. I was surprised to see bird strike as the biggest one. But certainly vegetation, that's the #1 cause of outages across the provinces, specifically on Vancouver Island. We do a lot of work to try and mitigate tree impact on our system. In Vancouver, in BC, we have more trees per kilometer of utility line than any place else in North America. And on Vancouver Island, we have 3 times that. We have 3 times more trees per kilometer of utility line than any place else in North America. Well, it's beautiful and it brings people here and they're amazed by it. It can certainly cause us and residents of the island problems when we try to keep the lights on all the time. So we have made improvements to the system. We did improvements in 2015. We upgraded the substation at Great Central Lake and at Long Beach to meet the anticipated growth of the area. We did, I remember in 2016, we did some upgrades to the system to allow their distance between the fiber optics and the transmission line when the fiber optic line was put into the West Coast as well. And of course, we did the Kennedy Hill expansion. Work was done there, new poles, new equipment along the line there when the Kennedy Hill work was done. And of course, the Long Beach field office, which I'll talk about at the end, but that's just a great addition and realizing that it provides us growth potential on the West Coast and meeting anything that's post-disaster, meeting any post-disaster expectations. We can do that with that facility. The Long Beach reinforcement, as I mentioned, just to help meet future load growth, that was meant on the transformers coming in. Next one, please. Yes. Time there. And of course, the Kennedy Hill work. I don't have to remind everybody here about that work. Caused us quite a bit of grief in the work we had to do. Had to take some outages, some planned outages for the community to do the work. Not all work could be done as we call it live or hot. We had to take outages for some of that work. And so the other part of making sure we can keep the lights on is meeting the growth in the area. And this one is part of the feeder upgrade. It's to meet the load growth for, as I say, the wastewater treatment facility and residential development that's planned for the area. It goes from, we've done some work, preliminary work. Actually, go to the next slide there. We've done work from the substation just east of the visitor center. We undergrounded the line from there to the visitor center. We're doing work through the park soon, but we've done vegetation work outside the park boundaries. And I would definitely like to extend my gratitude, hats off to the crews that did the work. It was unfortunate they turned a situation where it was lemons and made lemonade when the roads were down. Crews went in the back roads and did everything they could. They said, let's get this done. They got it done ahead of schedule because they realized people weren't coming in to be less impact to the community. So they did all the pole stringing that they could outside of the park boundaries and did that a lot faster and ahead of schedule than they should be. So I was surprised to see all of it done, heard when it was all done. And the vegetation work, I know it may seem like it's quite substantial, but I was surprised at how well that went. I guess it was good forethought when they developed the highway through there and how much road allowance it gave. That there was impact certainly to private property owners a little bit, but it was mostly road allowance work. So that way there wasn't impact on private properties and viewscapes. They weren't exposed all of a sudden to the highway as much as maybe I had thought. So that turned out well, better than expected. Maybe if you're a resident, it may not be the best, but certainly the way it looks and what I know, my experience in 20 years on hydro on the island, how it could have gone, it certainly went a lot better than one might have expected, considering how much vegetation had to come out. We still have to go through the parks. We still have work to do through the park vegetation. Of course, working very closely with parks, making sure that, anything environmentally sensitive with regards to amphibians, bird nesting season is a consideration. Of course, culturally sensitive trees, vegetation, you have to consider that. So all those things are well managed when we work with parks and working through that area. And we anticipate that it'll be this October when that work is done in the park. Right now, they're doing some digging of poles, getting set to put poles in. And then when they do that, then they'll be in with the line crews and restringing the lines going in there so they can add the other circuit going through there. And hopefully everything will be in place by October, which is important for us because, as I say, we're a winter peaking facility. Loads may go up because of summer heat, air conditioning and things like that. But we have to make sure we meet the coldest day of the year when the lights are on, the heat's on, TV's on, everybody's at home. That's when our usage is at its highest, and we have to make sure we meet that demand at that time. Just some idea of vegetation work. All the vegetation work that you've seen in the past little while has not all been about the project, but we have done quite a lot of vegetation work to left an impact. We have a 4-year cycle where we go into an area every 4 years we'll go back into an area, remove hazard trees, reduce contact with our lines to eliminate the possibility of outages, not just in wintertime, but of course in summer as well. Next slide, please. Of course, we have our Long Beach office on Port Albion. That was a great addition. Before, the crews had their office and truck bays at the Long Beach substation. With this, allows us to have larger vehicles, accommodates more staff, bigger yard to store stuff. It's away from the substation. So if there's God forbid, a disaster in the area, we have the ability to muster crews, state-of-the-art facilities. It's in a tsunami safe zone. It's geologically, it's in where it should be. Environmentally, it's where it should be. So we can make sure that we're there in case something happens, that crews can come in and have the equipment and of course accommodate new growth with larger trucks as we anticipate. And I think that would be it, just at the time. Thank you. And if there's any questions, happy to.
Fantastic. Thank you. Questions from council? I see none. I'm quite thankful for the upgrade. It's going to be great.
Thank you. Yes, I used to say, I know it may seem like a lot there if you're a longtime resident, but the stuff I've seen happen on the island, we've had to do work like that. I was impressed. And again, hats off to the crews. If you're watching in the area, local line crews, they did a great job of getting that work done, taking advantage of the unfortunate situation of lack of traffic coming in, but making sure there's no way it's minimal impact to tourism and anything like that. Because there's sometimes they did have to take an outage.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fantastic. Thanks to the crews.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We have correspondence 9.1 from Tla-o-qui-aht First Trust regarding 2023 vital signs report. Any comments from council? Seeing none. Presentations and reports. We have an invited presentation from Tofino Housing Corporation. And Kelly, welcome. We have a new Tofino Housing Corporation Executive Director. So it's great to see you and welcome.
Thank you. Great to see you too, Mayor. So good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Kelly Lin. For those of you guys haven't met me before, I am the new Executive Director of Tofino Housing Corporation. So there's no formal presentation today. A letter from HTC has been sent forward to you based on the April 2023 council meeting discussed with Ian Scott previously to update you on the headwater rental application process. And while I'm really new, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions. I will definitely work with the staff and to answer your questions. Thank you.
Great. We have headwood Asian tenant selection amendments. Do we have any motions for this? Let me just look around.
I don't believe so,
No.
Mayor Law. That was just a brief introduction and I'm just referencing the correspondence that was included in council's package.
Great. Thanks very much. It's great to read. Well, welcome, Kelly. Anybody else from council? Put it up.
Although, yeah, welcome. It's good to see you're on board, and we'll see you soon at one of our board meetings.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, I believe now we'll move on to 10.5, and we have a development application procedure bylaw, first, second, and third reading, and we do have the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Are you ready for me to present, or will staff be introducing this item at all?
I just go right ahead. It's all yours.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation for you guys. Alrighty, I'm hoping everybody can see that. Okay. Just get this up here. Okay. All right. Well, welcome, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me tonight. We've got a presentation regarding the development application procedures bylaw that's attached to your agenda for consideration tonight, as well as an amendment to Council's delegation bylaw as well. It's been a while since we've presented on this topic. We've had some workshops in the past with Council where we've received direction, which has informed the bylaw. So I will provide a brief review of the project that is coming to the close that Tofino was fully funded for from UBCM, as well as an introduction to the development application procedures bylaw that's being drafted based on the direction we've received to date from Council and staff, and highlight some of the key changes and sort of shifts in direction compared to the existing bylaw framework. And then we'll get into some of the next steps associated with the adoption of this bylaw. In terms of timing, this UBCM program that the district's been successful receiving is coming to a close with the completion date of all of the work associated with it of August 15th, with final reporting done by September 15th. So this is one of the key and final pieces of this program, along with updated communication materials, which are also sort of in the final draft form and will be shared with the community on websites and email updates as well to those that were participating in the process. This program originates from a provincial development application procedures review and a desire to see municipalities do what they can to streamline development application processes in hopes that we can get more housing supply online. And it was determined that there was some municipalities more than others, but where applications are being held up for many months, if not years. And so the province did a review and kind of came up with some general sort of principles and things that they saw around the province, which then led to a funding program through UBCM where the district was successful in this application. The province also made some amendments to the Local Government Act, including the removal of the default requirement for public hearings for zoning amendments that are consistent with the OCP. OCP amendments still would require public hearings. As well, the province expanded the delegation powers to staff of minor development variance permits. And in general, through the provincial review, there was a recommendation for increasing delegation to staff wherever council felt that there was the legislative authority and that council felt that that was warranted to streamline processes. So what does a development procedures bylaw typically consider and take care of? Essentially, it's sort of providing a framework for application processing procedures. In this case, we've recommended consolidating the development approval information as well and items around professional reliance and professional reporting requirements, public engagement beyond what's in the Local Government Act and anything sort of over and above the Local Government Act, as well as some parameters around agency referrals and the collection of security for landscaping and environmental protection, and the delegated authority from council. So in terms of, going the wrong way. In terms of the bylaws that are being replaced, we have the development application procedures bylaw that's currently in place in the district that's being replaced, and also the development approval information area bylaw, which we're recommending in the bylaw attached to the report to consolidate essentially those two bylaws into one for ease of access and understanding of both staff and the development community that often refers to them. So the new bylaw does clarify application procedures and the steps associated with the different types of applications, as well as recommending and increasing delegated authority to staff based on the direction that we've had from council to date, and establishing a framework for a consistent review of applications. We've also recommended a slight amendment to council's delegation of council authority bylaw. In terms of the bylaw currently does have the delegation of development permits or select development permits to staff. So we're recommending putting the delegated authority within the development application procedures bylaw, just for ease of reference. So everything to do with development is all in one place. So some of the key changes is to align the bylaw with recommended best practices, as well as the revisions to the Local Government Act, consolidating information for ease of reference as much as possible. It does expand the scope of delegated of development permits as directed by council, removing the default requirement for public hearings as per the new changes in the Local Government Act. And it does establish sort of an alternate public engagement process and sort of formalizing that in terms of public information meetings, timing, responsibility, as well as some additional notification requirements and the erection of signs as well, which Tofino does have, but we've created a new sign template, which we'll show to council tonight as well. We do have established criteria and guidelines for delegated minor development variance permit in accordance with the changes to the Local Government Act, which is also incorporated in the bylaw. So in terms of one of the key changes is expanding the scope of development permits. The current practice does have delegation of staff for several development permit areas. The new bylaw, or the proposed bylaw, does recommend increasing this to all development permits as discussed with council, but that's based on having the advisory design panel review. And just as a bit of a recap for council, is issuing development permits is not a discretionary decision of council. Both the district and the applicant are bound to the guidelines that are adopted by council. And should council not like what you're seeing from a design perspective or environmental perspective, the best course of action would be to change those guidelines at the policy level. Many municipalities that have tried to have requirements over and above what's laid out in the design guidelines, the courts have ordered municipalities to issue development permits because you are bound to those guidelines. So it's really for staff, sticking to the guidelines that are set by council. And this does align with the best practices and recommendation of the province to increase delegated authority. And we're seeing, especially with this program, this UBCM development application process review program, we're seeing a lot of increased delegation around the province. So the new procedures bylaw that's before you for consideration does recommend delegating to the manager of planning so that they have the authority to generally require security associated with development permits, issue and amend development permits when there are no or only minor variances. So we have a separate section on the delegation of minor variances as well. And also staff, the manager of planning does have the ability, in accordance with this bylaw, to go, in their opinion, they're not comfortable with their delegated authority, and they feel that it would be in the public interest to instead have the application considered by council to basically make that decision and bring it forward to council. Staff would also have the ability to renew development permits that have been issued or lapsed, provided that they're still consistent with the OCP and relevant guidelines. So if the OCP was to change midstream and an application was lapsed, then it would not be delegated to staff. That would be considered by council for extension. Staff would also be able to issue minor development variance permits under the conditions set out in the procedures bylaw. So in terms of the delegation of minor development permits, which is new legislation enabling the delegation quite recently. So the draft process of delegation is a two-step approach, which includes consideration of what's minor, and you're utilizing both criteria and guidelines to guide staff decisions. So they would access the merits of the application based on those criteria and guidelines. There's a variance request that if they don't meet the criteria of minor, those variances would still go to council. Variance requests that are denied by staff can be reconsidered by council in accordance with the Local Government Act. So if staff feel that the variance doesn't meet that criteria and denies it, the applicant still has the opportunity for reconsideration by council. And as mentioned with the development permits, we've entered the clause as well. What we call the opt-out clause is when a variance request generates unmitigated public concern and staff feel it's in the public interest to be considered to council, they can move that application forward to council for consideration without denying the variance. Just it's a bit of a sort of a customer service working with the applicant consideration rather than formally having to deny it. The delegation to staff, we've also, regarding the minor development variances, in accordance with the legislation, so development variance permits that are considered by council require notification to surrounding property owners. However, the new legislation does not require minor variances to have the same requirement. So we've added in this bylaw a requirement for notification to be sent to property owners regarding minor variances, and then staff would take those concerns into consideration in their review. And as mentioned, if they feel there's unmitigated public concern regarding this variance, they take that into consideration and potentially opt out. In terms of the public hearings, which is new legislation, again, so allowing or basically not requiring a default requirement to go to public hearing. So when a zoning amendment is in alignment with the OCP. So, focusing that public consultation during the OCP, establishing the land uses you want to see as a community, talking about the vision. When you see applications that align with that, you do not need to have a public hearing. And this is sort of in the broad sense of the word in terms of the courts, in terms of alignment. Quite often in official community plans, there's policy that sometimes is conflicting, but generally it's really more about the future land use map and the general policy direction in the document. So with the waiving of the default, it's not actually waiving, it's removing the default requirement for public hearing. The municipality does have to provide public notice prior to first reading of the bylaw. So the public have the opportunity to comment earlier in the process than public hearing, which I also think is a positive, because public hearing, when you think of it, is actually quite late in the process and the bylaws have been drafted and a lot of work has been done. This gives the opportunity to provide formal comment to council earlier in the process. The bylaw also recommends a public information meeting process. The District of Tofino does do quite a lot of public consultation beyond the scope of public hearings already. It does formalize this a bit and has that applications may be required to host a public information meeting. I think most major public information or most major applications would be required by staff to have one. But if there's something very simple or almost a housekeeping amendment, you wouldn't have to hold a public information meeting in that case. In this case, the notification would be sent to the surrounding property owners. That would be done by the district just to provide sort of a consistent notification regarding these meetings and making sure, you know, when it's on district letterhead, I think envelopes might get open more than if it was perhaps a development company or things like that. However, the applicant is responsible for advertising the public information meeting and hosting the public information meeting and would be in control of the communications at the meeting. However, there's guides that have been established to guide that with the for the applicant, and also they would be providing a summary for council that would also be subject to sort of an outline of requirements and clear expectations from the district. A notice of application sign would also be placed on the property for most of the major land use applications, OCP amendments, zoning amendments. They may be placed for temporary use permits depending on the scale, for example. We have a new branded sign template that's being created to reflect the district logo and recent branding. The onus for the construction and posting of the sign is on the applicant. And then we've asked, you know, that there's some guidelines in terms of the placement of the sign and accounting for weather and so on. And the draft bylaw requires provision of the sign proof at time of application. And further to council's direction as well, in the guide regarding signage, the development sign template and information, we've also asked and provided some information regarding the recycling and reuse of the sign. This is just a draft template of what the signs would look like, the type of information they have. It's really more about, hey, look what's going on here with the district branding and how to get more information. We've added notification requirements as mentioned for the minor development variance permits over and above the Local Government Act, but also for the comprehensive development plan framework or application framework that's been established under this bylaw, and public information meetings as well. And notification would still be following the 60 meters as established under the existing bylaw. So in terms of community engagement and industry engagement regarding the bylaws for consideration today, our recommendation is should council give 3 readings today, an update on the project in general, as well as the bylaw would be provided to the development industry and others that have participated in the process, posted on the website and Talk Tofino, so that anyone wishing to review the draft content of the bylaw could do that and provide comments with a fairly quick turnaround. Our experience is that, you know, there's not a lot of interest in these bylaws typically, but sometimes the development community may have a comment or two for consideration, and we'll report back to council with consideration of adoption should there be any recommended changes. So the next steps, should council give 3 readings, we'll finalize the internal procedures manuals and guides and new templates and forms and all the things that kind of go along with this. And then, you know, provide opportunity to comment and then bring this back to council for adoption in August. And that concludes my presentation. And if council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Super. Thank you very much. We'll open it up to council for questions, and then maybe we'll go into some comments, I'm sure. Council, I see Councillor Steer, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Law, and through the chair. Thank you, Nancy. This is a tremendous amount of work, and and you've taken a fairly complex subject and synthesized it in a way that I think most of council has the opportunity to understand. And so I really appreciate it. And I appreciate staff's report to council, which also helped to clarify some things. I have just a quick question, two questions. One on the public information meeting, and I think it's a brilliant idea. And that permission, that public information meeting, at the point in time, would that be integrated in that permission to proceed stage that we have in Tofino? So that would be the first time, because it's a may be required, and my expectation is on a big development project that we would be requiring such an information meeting. I suspect it would start at that permission to proceed. And I just wanted, as a side note, we have had those public information meetings, and they are a lot of work for staff as well. I know that we're putting the onus on the developer or the applicant, but they are still a tremendous amount of work for staff, and I just want that to be acknowledged. So I guess my question is, at the permission to proceed stage is when that PMI would be engaged, I suspect. I read the report, but I didn't see it quite articulated there.
Yeah, through the mayor, the public information meeting, I mean, some of the thought around that was perhaps a little bit later in the process than permission to proceed. And the reason for that being, if staff really wasn't sure where council considered a particular proposal, is to not have, the public concern and input if council wasn't even going to support it moving forward. So potentially later in the process. And also if you do public information meeting after a sort of initial review and agency comment, the applicant sometimes amends their application to sort of meet those staff comments and then take it forward. But there may be situations where I think the time could be a little bit fluid. They tend to occur sort of after staff and agencies have had a chance to kind of look at the application and provide comment, because quite often applications get amended based on that. But certainly the idea is like well before first reading or notification of first reading, so that there's an opportunity to respond to any concerns the public may have.
Great, thank you. And if I may follow up through the chair. The other one is a little more tricky, and I'm not sure how to phrase the question. It's regarding, in the summarization part of the report, the delegated development permits. And I will admit to, the staff did a great job of recognizing and articulating that there is a certain comfort level in the delegation of that authority. And I respect that. And we have had preliminary discussions around that. And I am channeling a former Councillor Bart, in these discussions around that delegation of authority. And my question is particularly around, and I'm not sure how this will play out, and that's why, excuse my ignorance on this. In some of the areas, and especially around the development permit areas that we have listed out, and there's a variety of them. The ones that I have concerns about in terms of that delegation of authority revolve around several of those that are in the environmental realm, such as our riparian DPA or mudflats DPA, wildlife habitat, and foreshore DPA. And I'd be comfortable explaining my rationale for this maybe in the debate portion of council. My question comes around and this is a procedural and I guess technical question. My discomfort is in removing or I guess giving that authority over in those particular areas. Is there the ability for council to instruct and to have those removed as a delegated authority, or am I just way off center on this on this particular issue?
Through the mayor, the environmental and hazardous land type delegation, which are often referred to as technical development permits, are probably the most common delegated DPs and are currently already delegated within this District of Tofino. So to answer your question, they're quite commonly delegated because there's professional reliance associated with those. But in terms of your question, if council generally wanted to take that back within your authority, that's essentially just an amendment to this bylaw.
Great, thank you. And I do recognize that the professional level of that. And I guess my question also stems around in terms of the requirement for those and staff's ability to delegate those approvals in essence. I suspect in those cases that staff would clearly articulate that to council moving forward. And I guess I just might, it's upon reflection on this particular subject, going back into March when we had those initial engagement processes and the concerns around the environment that may councils come, councils go, planners come, planners go. And to be able to have the ability for a little more delegated authority or oversight, I would be more comfortable having that placed in the elected official position. So this is something that maybe I'll leave for the debate portion with council to possibly make that recommendation there. But I really thank you for your answer on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. We'll flesh that out maybe in the comment section, and maybe at that point, Nancy can, once she hears council, will maybe invite you to speak on that a bit more if that comes up. Any other questions from council? I have one, and actually it's actually leading off of, or perhaps on the same vein as Councillor Steers, is that with the delegation of authority, whether it's the DPAs or the minor developments, is there a mechanism that would retain some sense of council oversight in that, either council is able to, get an annual report of all of these minor variances or specific DPAs, sensitive ones, perhaps like foreshore developments or something like that, so that it gives council, it mandates that council has the ability to review what has happened, so that if there were any changes that council would like to make, council has that data. And I say that because right now I think some of the delegated DPAs, for instance, council will never see those. Once they're delegated, we don't see those, I think, and if we don't see them, there's no way for council then to assess if changes are needed or even take action to make changes. Is there some kind of mechanism that would maybe bridge, that delegated authority with, maintaining some kind of council oversight without necessarily taking back authority?
Yes, very much. The very common approach for municipalities is essentially to provide, whether it be semi-annual or annual reporting on applications, and more specifically, providing delegated application summaries. What was received, what was the decision, a brief summary, and it would give an opportunity for council also to provide some feedback at that time. In terms of having the conversation about, maybe is there a need for a review of the development permit guidelines? Because that is likely, if you're not happy with what you're seeing, maybe the guidelines need to be reviewed and become more stringent, but it would be an opportunity through annual or semi-annual reporting to have that conversation and take the time to review the decisions that have been made.
That's exactly where I was going. So how would you, if council decided they wanted some kind of amendment to that, how would you do that? Where would you put it? Or is that too specific?
Well, Mr. Mayor, my experience is in municipalities tend to provide, or that the ones that have, say, strategic priorities, for example, there's often reporting around strategic priorities and how you're doing on them and updates. And you could include however often you want to do it. Sometimes I find quarterly is too much, but if it's like once a year or twice a year, to provide an update at that time, that's, I would say, the most common approach.
And one more question, if I may, just where would you include that language? Would that kind of language be included in this bylaw amendment?
Mr. Mayor, I would say that this could just take place even as part of, strategic priorities and providing updates to council along with application reviews. It could be in, I don't think it needs to be in this bylaw, I think it needs to be more of a conversation with the CAO on getting those updates and working that into sort of your sort of legislative framework.
Thanks very much. Councillor Anderson.
My question is, I guess what I'm a little uncomfortable with is when something is called guidelines, because it seems to me that those are not requirements. And so when we're delegating authority and staff has a set of guidelines that they refer to what extent can they waive them because they're not requirements, or how much flexibility does the language of guidelines give the person or those delegated with the authority? And another question sort of similar is that in your presentation, staff has or would be given the delegated authority to require security. Would they also have, in cases, delegated authority to waive security? So does that work cut both ways, that authority?
Through the mayor, in terms of the definition of guidelines, when you're talking about them from a development permit perspective, I mean, it's very clear in the courts and the legislation that the municipality is bound to those guidelines. But if you look closely at guidelines, I mean, they can be written with encourage, words like that, wiggle words, if you will. So again, if you're feeling that they're being interpreted in a way that you don't wish to see them interpreted, that's where you need to go back and revisit those guidelines and make them more specific and stringent. I think there's a trend in the past where there was a lot of guidelines that were added in just so that there'd be something to kind of draw on that resulted in conflict and so on. So I think there's definitely a trend to make those guidelines more clear, more specific, and less contradictory. So I think that the focus there should really be on how those are written and making sure that they're delivering the end product that council does want to see. At the same time, you're dealing with a vast sort of land-based application considerations, and sometimes you just can't anticipate every single scenario. But the guidelines are the place to do that and to firm that up and to make sure that if you want them to be specific, that they are.
Okay, having heard that, I wouldn't mind before final adoption council to fully understand which guidelines we would be looking at delegating authority on, so that we understand. Possibly there's some of our guidelines that need some updating, I'm not sure.
Any further questions for Nancy? No. Council, round of comments and debate between council. We'll try to keep it quick and to the point. Councillor Steer, would you like to start us out?
Thank you, through the mayor. I think, Mayor Law, you articulated what I was trying to get by a little more clearly than I was. And Nancy, I think you explained what I was alluding to regarding that ability. I think I'm comfortable. My concerns, of course, were centered around when we look at the OCP and we look at those development permit areas, and through the Local Government Act in Section 448, and that the objectives of a designated area and those environmental concerns that are in there. And I just before council meeting received a report specifically on our mudfloods and how important and the increased disturbances in those areas. And recognizing that we don't get that many, from those DPA areas specifically in there, and that's why I was really wanting to invest that authority back into staff. So I think you explained it, Mayor Law, clearly, and I think there is a mechanism there to ensure that that is being taken care of. So if it needs a little more clarification, I'd love for council to be able to talk to it. But so far, I think I'm comfortable with where we went with that and the explanation that was given.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you just for a clarification here. Is you're happy with no amendments to this, but to see a semi-annual or annual report for council's feedback to SAS if guidelines are being interpreted in council's pleasure?
Yeah, I don't know if happy would be the right word, but certainly I think that reporting process on a semi-annual basis with the amount of development permit area applications that come forward, I would be comfortable with that, with the ability for council to be having the ability to have that input into those areas. Thank you.
Further comments from council?
Just when I was starting to understand our development permit process for changing. I'm glad to see that it bringing more clarity to the process.
I mean, personally, my only hesitation to all of this, I think it's all fantastic, is the lack of guaranteed reporting, and maybe I'll look to our CAO about that. If it's just up to, you know, the mayor or council asking the CAO for annual or semi-annual reporting, that it seems to me it doesn't sort of entrench oversight. It sort of becomes, you know, maybe it does and maybe it doesn't, and as councils change and staff potentially change, that oversight could be eroded unless it's actually written in a bylaw somewhere. So that's my only concern, but maybe I'll actually look to our CAO for a comment on that, we're debating.
Thank you, Mayor Law. Similar to how staff report out on Q3 financials, that process has been in place for probably over 10 years now, and we've expanded the content of that report from year to year. That feels like a good place and a good time to report out on strategic priorities, quarterly financials, as well as the delegated authorities that staff may have. So I would envision incorporating it into that process, and we can certainly talk more about the level of detail that council would like to see in that. But those are my initial comments, and that is the most consistent reporting that we would have to incorporate that into.
Okay, all right. Yes, Councillor.
A question, maybe building on that, would it be possible through the chair, when the notices are being mailed out to anyone who would be potentially affected by the rezoning, would it be possible to request that council receive a copy of that letter just so that we would be aware of what's happening? If not, you know, like not being part of the process, but just to see what's on the table.
Through the mayor, I think I probably need to just take that away and talk with staff and figure out what that process exactly looks like. And you mentioned rezoning, so that may be a little bit different.
Or yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll take that away and speak with staff, and then we can find out ways to more on an administrative level engage council in some of these decisions that are delegated to staff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Council, we've got a couple of recommendations. If there are no more comments or questions, let me just get them here. Now, if there are no amendments specifically to the recommendations before this, we can read them. If there are amendments, now's the time. I see none. Okay, I think this is getting support. So, and I would like just to say that we'll work together and find a way to ensure there's some annual or semi-annual oversight. That'd be great. So I'm looking to council. I guess we're going to read the grant readings, actually first, second, and third readings with no amendments.
Okay, I'll move the recommendation that District of Tofino Development Application Procedures Bylaw number 1331/2023 attached as Appendix 1 to the report titled Development Application Procedures Bylaw number 1331/2023. First, second, and third reading dated July 25th, 2023 be introduced and read first, second, and third time.
Okay, any further comments? All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Carry on, I believe.
Okay, we'll move that District of Tofino Delegation of Council Authority Amendment Bylaw number 1322.01/2023 attached as Appendix 2 to the report titled Development Application Procedures Bylaw number 1331/2023 first, second, and third reading dated July 25th, 2023 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second, Councilman Master. Any further comments? All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Okay, we are moving on to 10.2, Tofino Recreation Commission funds allocation. You have a report? From all?
A very short presentation.
Excellent.
No, I can't control the clicker. It's not like- Oh, so I can, okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is what I think will be a very brief presentation. The Tofino Recreation Commission was established in 1996 to support recreation in Tofino. The bylaw that established the Rec Commission was repealed at the November 11th, 2022 regular council meeting. And at that time, there were funds in the Rec Commission bank account. I'm not sure if the slide is cut off or if I've modified it since this was written, but just over $54,000 was remaining in the Rec Commission bank account. There's another account with a small balance of approximately $3,700 was established for slightly different purposes, but now all form part of the funds that are left over. Those funds have always formed part of the district's financial statements, so there's no change there. And the funds that the commission had in the account are primarily from fundraising, also donations from events like the Saltwater Classic that would fundraise funds annually and contribute those to the Rec Commission. Those funds were often fundraised for the purpose of and used for community projects, be it the skate park or the bike park, improvements to the village green, the multi-use path, a number of projects that were fundraised for over the years. And then I would say in the last maybe decade or so, a program called the Kids Access Fund, which provides funding for kids in the community or youth in the community that may have challenges accessing recreation otherwise due to financial barriers. So in 2022, the Recreation Advisory Committee was established with the terms of reference to advise council with regard to community recreation. And the Kids Access Program is carrying on right now. And we do have children accessing that program. So that's one consideration, is to look at the current and future needs there. And so staff is recommending that consideration be given to how those funds be used, be it for capital purchase or a piece of equipment, or for setting up a more permanent program to support the Kids Access Fund, but that those discussions be referred to the Recreation Advisory Committee to advise on how those funds should be allocated, and that would come back to council. That's the recommendation.
Excellent. Do we have any questions for clarity for Ms. Vermont? Yes, Councilor Master.
With the Kids Access Fund, I'm sure it varies year after year. What sort of a ballpark amount that gets given?
I don't know if I could say off the top of my head, but it's I would say $3,000 to $4,000. Is that looking over at the financial folks and they're nodding their heads? So I think that's sort of in the neighborhood. If that's
okay.
That's not for you.
All right, is there any counselor adamantly opposed to the recommendation before us? I see no adamant opposition, so would somebody like to read this for endorsement?
I can read the recommendation.
Please go ahead.
That the report titled Tofino Recreation Commission Funds Allocation be referred to the Recreation Advisory Committee to advise on how the Tofino Recreation Commission funds are to be allocated.
Second by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments from council?
I just have one quick comment that there is an upcoming Tofino Recreation Advisory Committee coming up in August, and I'm sure we'll see this on the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you. All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you, Ms. Fremont.
Thank you.
We have signing authority, 10.3. We have no presentation for this. It's just to add Mr. Aaron Rogers, Director of Infrastructure.
We have a recommendation that staff be authorised to add Aaron Rogers, Director of Infrastructure, Public Works as a signing authority for the District of Tofino.
Second by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion is carried. We have a zoning amendment, 354th Street. Welcome. First time up.
First time up. Thank you for having me, Mayor and Council. For those members of council that I hadn't yet formally met, my name's Alex Lader. I joined the district in the planning services team as senior planner at the end of March. Coming to you most recently from Jasper, Alberta, where I worked with Parks Canada in a similar planning role. Today I'm going to talk to you about an application for a zoning amendment at 354th Street. More specifically, I'm here to request permission to proceed. Also to just have council decide whether to hold a public hearing and provide a general introduction to the application itself. A bit more context on the application. We received it in April of 2022. I also note that in 2019, for the same property, we received an application for a zoning amendment to enable the development of a residential neighborhood in a different portion of this large parcel, which received permission to proceed in 2020. This application I'm presenting to you today is out of scope of that previous application and separate. So just in case that previous application sort of came to mind, this is separate from that. A little bit of locational context. The subject property is quite large. It's located at the top of 4th Street. It is approximately 24.4 hectares in size. It's largely undeveloped, but there is an existing single family residence, as you can see outlined in the red circle, to the western portion of the property. And the property is accessed by 4th Street to the west, Alberto Road and Lone Cone Road to the north, and Ellers Street to the east. So a little overview of the proposal. The intent is to rezone a small portion of the property to the R2 zone from the A2 zone to enable a single lot subdivision that surrounds the existing dwelling that I highlighted in the previous slide. Other aspects of the proposal include the removal of short-term rental permissions that would be associated with the new R2 zone and consideration of a possible new 4th Street road alignment, which I'll get into in further slides. So here we can see the approximate location of the area to be rezoned, shaded in red, along with the preliminary location of a new alignment for the 4th Street road right of way, sort of in the lower left corner of the parent parcel. So the application has been reviewed for alignment with relevant policy documents, including the Vision to Action Plan, the Official Community Plan, the Housing Needs Assessment, the Multimodal Transportation Plan, and the Land Use and Demand Study. Now, overall, there's general policy alignment. Now, in some instances, there's limited applicability due to the the sort of minimal and small scope and scale of the application. But some important aspects of the proposal that do align with policy include, for example, with respect to the OCP, the property is located within the future homes designation, which supports increased density and compact neighborhood development. So a move to the R2 district in this case would increase potential density on the site while respecting form and character of the adjacent properties. In addition, the removal of the short-term rental permissions aligns with the key goal of the OCP. And as mentioned, the potential realignment of 4th Street has the potential to advance several longer-term goals of our guiding policies to facilitate access to the remainder parcel and future development of the future homes area. So here I've provided a comparison table of the key differences between the existing A2 zone and the proposed R2 zone. The key difference here is the minimum lot area. The minimum lot area of the A2 district or zoning district is too large to enable a subdivision of the desired size included in the application. In other words, in order to create a lot of the desired size, a change to the zone with a more suitable minimum lot area is required. And in this case, the R2 district is chosen. Overall, both zones permit similar uses. The main difference I would highlight is the R2 district allows for a slightly higher density dwelling units by allowing a two-family dwelling, which better aligns with the OCP from an increased density perspective. And as noted, although the R2 district allows for short-term rentals, we would propose that that specific permission be removed. When we look at other planning considerations in general, there are minimal implications due to the scope and scale, again, of this rather small rezoning application. However, the main story I think that needs to come through is consideration of the 4th Street road alignment, which will be further discussed on the next slide. When it comes to form and character, there will likely be minimal impact. The existing dwelling that is located within the proposed rezoning area is intended to remain at least for the short term, but if developed under the permissions of the R2 district, the permissions would be compatible with the surrounding area. From a housing perspective, well, there's no affordable housing contemplated as part of this application. With the removal of the short-term rental permissions, there is a sort of housing benefit associated with that should it be developed in the future. In the long term, providing potential rental opportunities for the community. From an environmental perspective, the area to be rezoned has been previously disturbed to allow for the existing single-family dwelling that's there. So there's likely to be additional environmental impact. However, should this application move forward, there would be further assessment of environmental implications related to the realignment of 4th Street. From a flood and tsunami hazard perspective, the property is located completely outside of any known flood inundation or tsunami inundation areas. From a servicing perspective, the property is fully serviced, and due to the modest density increase, it's unlikely to have any implications on servicing, though that will have further investigations occur should this move forward by Public Works and Infrastructure. Another item to note related to environmental implications are the property is located within the wildlife habitat development permit area. Should this rezoning be approved and a subdivision application be considered, a wildlife habitat development permit would be required. So I'll cover the traffic access considerations here, which again, I think might be the most important. As you can see in the site plan, the The existing 4th Street right-of-way runs into the driveway of the existing single-family dwelling and the proposed lot in the rezoning area shaded in blue. As a result, a realignment is necessary to enable further access to the remainder parcel to the east and potentially enable the development of the future homes area. So while the realignment is unlikely to happen or be needed in the short term, it's a good idea for the district to understand either how or whether this road realignment can occur. So I think some of the key constraints that are likely to need to be considered for this road realignment are the steep and rocky terrain, potential environmental impacts. There's an existing comprehensive district zone in support of THC housing, as you can see just to the west of the proposed rezoning area. This new road realignment seems to overlap a little bit with that zone. That's something we would need to have a look at a little further as well. In addition, there would be other considerations for timing of road build out, location, of course, and then costs. So while we can do some preliminary assessments of the feasibility of road realignment at the rezoning stage, the subdivision, the potential subdivision stage is likely the best time to do a full investigation of the feasibility of the road realignment. Some other considerations should this rezoning move past the petition to proceed stage. There would be external and internal referrals following first reading. As mentioned, if the rezoning is adopted, the subdivision would be considered following that approval. Additional requirements at that time would include the wildlife habitat development permit and a full investigation of road realignment. We've considered how the existing community amenity contribution policy is implicated by this application. This is unlikely, any CACs are unlikely to be required due to the nature of the application and the scale of it. But we note that the removal of the short-term rental permissions under the R2 district would serve as a community benefit. And then finally, whereas rezoning applications are in alignment with the OCP policies, there is no requirements, or there's discretion rather to not move forward with a public hearing. And in this case, given there is alignment with the OCP and the minor scale of the application, our recommendation is to waive that public hearing requirement. So in summary, we've listed out 3 options here, but staff are recommending to grant permission to proceed with further review of the application and to waive the requirement of a public hearing.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm going to open it up to council for a round of questions for clarity from Stephen's leader. Councilor McMaster.
The Tofino Housing Corporation land, is that land buildable? Is it flat or?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councilor McMaster. I don't know a great deal of the history of that property. Just by looking at the site plan there, it looks like it is potentially within a steep area. I wonder if I could defer to either the manager of planning or members of the administration here for further history on the rezoning of that property.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the question, Councillor Master, through the chair. The THC zone that's currently zoned and has a particular zone on it was rezoned, I believe, in 2006, 2007 as part of the previous THC regime. That initial plan for DL 114 was done without much investigation into the actual feasibility of construction in those areas that were rezoned. So in as much as anything is buildable, that is buildable, but from a financial perspective, it's very much the side of a cliff. So there'd be considerable terraforming or geotechnical works that would be required in order to actually construct anything there. It's unlikely, based on my conversations with current THC staff and particularly current THC directions, it's unlikely that pre-zoned area will ever be used for housing under the current economic climate and the current plans that THC has in place. So while we would be considering using part of that area that has been zoned for a road right of way, should this continue in the future, it's unlikely that would actually have any implications for the affordable housing directions that the THC is moving in on deal with, or is anticipating moving on. Of course, much more conversation with council and the community.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Councillor Sloan.
My question was regarding the removal of the short-term rental permissions. Would that also include bed and breakfast permissions?
Thank you for the question through the chair. I think that's something we could consider. Is that something that council would deem important as well?
I personally would.
Might be
No, I'll speak to that one as well.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just thank you for the question again through the chair. I think we'd be removing all short-term rental permissions, so for vacation rentals as well as bed and breakfast. That's the direction that the OCP sort of demands. One of our reasons for doing that, as well as considering the R2 zone, as Mr. Later has alluded to, is that our R2 zones do actually allow short-term rentals should a single-family home with a suite be built. So often in R2 zone, at least at this point in time, it's more advantageous for a property owner simply to build a vacation rental as opposed to building a duplex of suites, which would provide much more rental opportunities within the town. So in this case, by removing those, all short-term rental permissions, that's vacation rental as well as bed and breakfast, we have the opportunity to create what is essentially 4 units of housing and the impetus for any development of that property in the future to actually take advantage of that full zoning right. That being said, my understanding is that the current property owner has no interest in further developing the property besides the house that's already there. They're mostly just interested in subdividing a small portion of the parent property so that they can be purchased by the current homeowner.
Thank you.
Further questions? Oh, I see Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. My question revolves around the R2 zoning. One of the benefits of this potential rezoning application is that increased density, which aligns very nicely with our OCP in that location. I'm just wondering if in conversations with the applicant, if a more dense zoning had been considered above and beyond the R2.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. At this moment, I'm unaware of conversations to consider further density. I think sort of as Peter alluded to, the primary intent, at least for the rezoning in this case, is to enable the subdivision of a single lot surrounding the existing single family dwelling. The application originally contemplated rezoning to the R1 district. Staff recommended an opportunity to increase the density by changing that proposal to the R2 district. I don't know that enabling a zone that would enable further density is something that would be contemplated by the applicant, but it is something that we could consider.
Yeah, thank you. And the only reason I ask is these are long-term implications for the property, which will precede the current owner once if the property were to be sold into the future. And that's the reasoning for that question. So thank you.
Super. I have a question. Council's seen no hands up, but just a quick question. The road realignment, if this goes through, an assessment is required, and eventually the result of that assessment, road realignment. Who pays that cost, both the assessment and the realignment?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Law. So at least at the rezoning stage, my understanding is that preliminary assessments, things like geotechnical assessments, environmental assessments, those sorts of reports will be borne by the developer. When it comes to actually building the road. Timing is sort of unknown. It's unlikely that a build out of the road would be required at this point. There's no, future neighborhood in the remainder portion of the parcel that would necessitate a significant infrastructural upgrade like that at this time. I think those, and by all means, I might call on manager planning to address, to add as they see fit, but I think likely. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I think so. Initial assessments would be borne by the developer, and I think a further conversation would need to occur to better understand who pays for what in the timing.
Go
I
ahead.
can maybe just add a little bit. Typically, we require that development pays for itself. So my understanding of how we would proceed in this particular situation would be that through the rezoning, we may do some initial explorations. However, it's at the subdivision stage that we would actually secure a road reserve by a covenant over that area. We would want to make sure that it is feasible. It's something that's in the best interest of the district. However, that would simply remain as a road reserve, as we have many road reserves within the district that are essentially undeveloped roads. When they get developed is when the property around them develops. So at a later date, when that property does develop, that would be on the owner to install the road at that point to our standards. So it wouldn't become a road overnight. It probably wouldn't become a road through any of this development, but at a later date, when that private property does develop, that's when it would become a road, and the financial burden would be borne by the developer in that particular situation.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. That's an excellent answer to my question. I have no further questions.
I'll move the recommendation that staff proceed with further review of the zoning amendment application for 354th Street, and that no public hearing be held in association with the application.
Seconded by Councillor Thomas. Any further comments from council? Calling the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. I believe that is it for presentations and reports, if I'm not mistaken. Bylaws, we have none. Business initiated by council members. Do we have any committee and external appointment verbal reports? Calling once, twice, thrice, seeing none.
Excuse me, Mayor Law, sorry, I got my hand up.
Oh, I couldn't see it. It's a little, it's yellow and white.
Yes, yeah, I apologize for it looks like I'm in a prison lineup background here, but thank you. Yeah, just two updates. One, a few from the ACRD, starting with a big project that's going underway, the solid waste management plan. There's an advisory committee that's been struck. This is a requirement of the province out at our landfill and in the Alberni Valley landfill. So at this point, the advisory committee is being put together. I've been appointed by the ACRD to sit on that committee. It's quite a large and extensive committee that will consist of 15 appointed public advisors. There will be 11 technical advisory members and 10 First Nation representatives on this advisory committee. This is anticipated to take a couple of years, and we're hoping to have that ministerial approval for this project by spring of 2025. There's also been an amendment, and you may or may not have, it's been in our Talk to Tofino, but amendment to the start collection time for our sort and go collection. It is now starting at 7 a.m. And that amendment was made to for the purpose of the service provider to be able to get everything out to the landfill within the landfill hours of operations. So that means for those of us that are very close to the beginning, we need to have our trash, organics and recyclables out before 7 a.m., between 5 and 7 a.m. And just a very big one, the interim transit solution for residents of the West Coast. That contract has been awarded to Pacific Western Transportation. Pacific Western Transportation currently operates services in the Port Alberni, Comox Valley, Campbell River, Mount Washington, etc. This will be a year-round service. The final details of the contract and implementation are well underway. There is already 3 light-duty vehicles that are being associated with that, et cetera, et cetera. The awarded contract was for $535,000 within the budget that was proposed for that interim transit solution. ACRD will be has a request to the Minister of Transportation to have a ministerial meeting at UBCM to once again discuss the long-term solutions for transit on the West Coast. The last one there. Yes, Mayor Law and I had the fortunate opportunity to attend on July 12th the upgrades, the ribbon cutting, in fact, the ribbon untying ceremony out at the landfill. This was the culmination of a huge project out there. The ACRD upgraded the tipping facility, the organics processing area. This was a $6 million project, as well as upgrades to the Alberni Valley landfill that came from the federal government through their community building fund. We had a great time out there. We got to talk trash, and we got to give a great tour of the new facility. The last one is I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the USS Ukiluit Secondary School grand opening. And it also coincided with National Indigenous Peoples Day, and that was on June 21st. It was a wonderful opening to that school with presentations and a beautiful pole that was raised and blessed at the ceremony. There was a number of welcoming from a lot of our local youth, Indigenous youth groups. And then on June 24th was the 2023 USS grad ceremony. Was able to attend, and once again a great occasion. I was able, fortunately, to dispense our bursaries, and the two winners of that were Tla-o-qui-aht and Anna Udovicki that received the District of Tofino bursaries and both of them are using it to pursue their higher education needs. And that is it.
Lovely. Thank you. Any other notes from council? I just realized I missed one thing. My mayor's report, ICE-T, Island Coastal Economic Trust, which I am part of, was able to pull a intercommunity transportation report for the province, and so the province is looking at fast tracking perhaps some intercommunity transportation, which is of course deeply needed. I believe also ICE-T is also looking at some reports for the Highway 4 shutdown, but we'll see. I think that actually might come out soon. That's it for business initiated by council members. We have no unfinished business. Mr. Shortall, do we have anybody signed up for question period?
Currently nobody signed up, Mayor Law. I will do a call to the public. Anyone attending via Zoom can use the question and answer function to ask the question to the council. So you need to use the Q&A function and state your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. So I'll call 3 times now. Call in once. Call in twice. Call in 3. No questions.
Super. And I will move us into the closed session from the chair. I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter. 1A, personal information for an identifiable individual who is being considered for position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. 1C, labor relations or other employee relations. 1B, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. 1I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor client preference, including communications necessary for that person purpose. 1L, discussions with municipal officers, employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, progress reports, preparing an annual report in section 98 annual municipal report. And 2B, the consideration of information received and held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and a provincial government or the federal government or both, or between a provincial government and federal government or both, and a third party. Second by Councilor Master, all in favor? Okay, we're going to move into closed session, but I'm going to call Will Reese.